Welcome to the Paperback Warrior Podcast.
All right, welcome to the second episode of 2020. I'm your co-host, Eric, and we're happy to present another Paperback Warrior show for you. Remember to visit paperbackwarrior.com, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. We're not getting a whole lot of subscribers, so please remember to do that. My co-host, Tom, is across the table from me, and he seems really anxious to talk about something or another.
Yeah, I want to plug a couple YouTube channels.
All right, go for it.
First one is a guy named Jules, Jules, Burt, B-U-R-T. He's this British guy with this incredibly smooth, nice voice who does really good videos, very well produced, about vintage pop culture paperbacks. He did a recent great episode on paperback fanzines, hyping Justin Marriott's work, and he also mentioned Paperback Warrior in that, which is very kind of him. But he does really, really nice videos, which is something that we should talk about off the air, about whether we want to get involved with the video business. Another, I got the weirdest, fan mail from the guy named Matt Wall, W-A-L-L. And if it wasn't for Facebook, I wanted to put it together. But as soon as I saw the guy's face, I'm like, oh, my God, that's the guy. He has a YouTube channel that I like called Paperback Junkie, J-U-N-K-Y. He's an indie writer himself. He's a California guy, and he makes videos with his wife, Zoe. He's a voracious reader of vintage fiction. He does book hauls and book reviews. I'm a huge fan of his. I was a fan of his before I even got involved with Paperback Warrior. I was so surprised and honored when he reached out. In one of his recent episodes, he discusses the Long Arm series and Kitten with a Whip. He covers a lot of fantasy and science fiction. He chastised me for not being a fan of Raymond Chandler and Mickey Spillane. His videos are way more freewheeling than Jules Burt. He's got like a cat crawling on him or his wife doing the dishes in the background. The dude has never, ever found the pause button on his recorder, but it's a fun show, and he's got really great taste in books, and so I enjoy it a lot, and it's called Paperback Junkie. You should check that out. Anyway, switching gears, Eric, we are at the beginning of January still. Do you have any book-related New Year's resolutions for 2020?
I do, and real quick before I forget, there's an author by the name of Mark Cavella, and he has a book out now called Tabernacle. He says that fans of westerns, crime noir, and men's adventures fiction should really like it. One Amazon review states that the book has an exceptionally memorable anti-hero. We here stick to mostly vintage books on Paperback Warrior, but those of you that want to read something new can check it out at Amazon. And yes, I do have some predictions or resolutions. Yeah.
What are they?
Yeah, we're not doing predictions. Yeah, resolutions. I'm going to start reading Matt Helm, I think, and I'm going to start reading Sam Durrell, which is also known as the Assignment series.
By Edward Ahrens, right?
Yeah, Edward Ahrens. And I'm going to do the Sacketts. I think there's, 13, 14, 15, something like that.
Louis L'Amour, right?
Yeah, Louis L'Amour. In fact, I've read the first two already. So, and then I'm going to read Lawrence Block's Tanner series.
Oh, good. I read, that's one of the few series I've actually read twice because I enjoyed them so much in the 80s. But I think the last time I read them, I was like 23 years old. So I want to hear from you if they're good or if my fond memories of it are really old. The first one is called The Thief Who Couldn't Sleep. And
yeah.
It's one of the series that I just remember so fondly from my youth. I just don't know if they would hold up today now that I'm reading 200 books a year.
Yeah, I pulled it out today, actually. So I've got it on my table to read.
So my resolutions, I want to read a book by a woman, which I haven't done in ages. The woman I've actually chosen is Amber Dean, who wrote really interesting mysteries, it seems, with kind of a hard-boiled, murderous edge. I want to start the Charles Willeford Hoke Mosley series. I want to follow my own advice and purge some of the books off my shelves that I'll never read. And there's one resolution that I want you to help me with. I think we, as a podcast, can do a better job with show notes on using our Facebook feed, right? So we hype the podcast every Monday morning on the Facebook feed for Paperback Warriors Facebook page, and we talk about so many books. If we can get our head straight and post pictures of the books that we're talking about, because the art for the podcast really only has room for 2 pictures, or else it becomes a bit more of a collage. It'd be kind of cool to make the Facebook page a little more interactive with our fans. Now, we repost stuff from our Facebook page on other pages, but I think if we declare that the Paperback Warrior Facebook page is the place to talk about the podcast, show you the books we're discussing, give you maybe links to where to buy them, stuff like that, it might be a cool way to interact with the fans more. What do you think? What do you think?
Yeah, we could definitely do that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Good. Anyway, so what's on the show today?
I've got an Amber novel if you need it.
I got a couple. Which one do you got?
I've got Bulletproof, and it looks amazing.
Yeah, it's got they got great covers. So if nothing else, we can suck the fans into reading a book review by a woman based on the beautiful cover art.
Yeah, I think it's one of those pan books, and they do great art.
Yeah.
Today, we've got a feature on the Saint books by Leslie Charteris that Tom's going to be pretty excited to present. He's also going to review a Saint novel for us called Alias the Saint. And I'm going to review Soldier of Fortune #2, The Deadliest Game by Peter McCurtain. So the clock's ticking. So Tom, start us off with The Saint.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the Saint series by Leslie Charteris, and by no means am I an expert on this. I haven't read that many of them, but I want to tell you what about the series and why it's important and why you should know more about it. So there's novels, novelettes, short stories that span from 1928 to 1997. Again, not to mention movies, TVs, comics, and radio. The Saint is one of the most enduring characters in thrilling adventure fiction. Even more amazingly, most of this literary output was done under the authorship of one man, this Leslie Charteris, who lived from 1907 to 1993. In 1964, he stopped writing the books full-time, and ghostwriters began carrying the load for the popular series. It's a British series. Many of the paperbacks in the series are actually 2 or 3 novellas packaged together in one volume, so that you're not asking for a long reading commitment for them. The Saint is a guy named Simon Templar. The nickname of the Saint was most likely derived from his initials, S.T., right? He's a British character from a British author, and there's a lot of British humor in it. Templar has a dry, very smart-ass sense of humor. They started out as novellas that originally appeared in the Thriller magazine in the UK starting in 1928. Simon Templar essentially is a gentleman thief, but he's also the hero. He's a lot like Robin Hood in that he's not stealing to enhance his own wealth, but rather to right a wrong, punish a bad guy, or enrich someone needy. His thefts are elaborate confidence games most of the time rather than heists like the Richard Stark Parker series. But the idea of the gentleman thief is really just a jumping-off point for a wide variety of mystery and globe-trotting adventure stories. It's not all lighthearted mischief. He kills people in many of the stories. He has I wouldn't call him an enemy, probably more of a foil in the stories, a Scotland Yard Inspector Claude Teal, who's always trying to catch the Saint and lock him up. But he also sometimes turns to the Saint for help in solving crimes because he knows that Templar is just so damn smart. For the American adventures, and there are a lot of them, there's an NYPD detective named Detective John Furnack that plays the same role. The Saint's an ageless character. His books always take place in the contemporary world, but he never seems to age. He's also a famous folk hero type. When he arrives in a new city, people know him. The police often greet him upon his arrival and warn him not to do anything to cause too much trouble. It reminded me a little bit of Robert Randizzi's idea in The Gunsmith of making the gunsmith sort of a folk hero character. In the books written during World War II, the Saint was recruited by the government to help track spies and do undercover work. The stick figure that you often see on Saint book covers with the halo is the Saint's calling card, where if he does something to somebody, he often leaves that image behind to take credit for his work, which seems like very bad criminal work idea for criminals. Yeah. But sometimes the Saint will actually break the fourth wall in the books and comment that there's no way he can be killed in this story because he's the hero of the series. Charteris was having a lot of fun with the character. There was a Saint magazine, which later became the Saint Mystery Magazine from 1953 to 1967, which featured a new Saint story every issue, as well as stories by others. For instance, the January 1967 issue had a Nero Wolfe story by Rex Stout and a Counterspy story by Michael Avallone. But again, the idea is that it's stories in line in the tradition of the Saint books. Charteris started retiring from writing the books following 1963's book The Saint and the Sun. The next book to carry Charteris's name was actually 1964's Vendetta for the Saint, written by a science fiction author named Harry Harrison. You ever heard of him?
No.
He also worked on the Saint comic strip. Harry Harrison wrote is either a book or a short story called Make Room, Make Room that was made into a famous movie called Nothing.
You got me.
Soylent Green.
Ah, okay. Yeah,
with Charlton Heston. Yep. Anyway, so for a while there, when the ghostwriters were writing it, Charteris was editing and revising the manuscripts. Anyway, so Charteris wrote 14 novels between 1928 and 1971, with the last 2 being co-written. He wrote 34 novellas and 95 short stories featuring Simon Templar. Between 63 and 97, an additional 7 novels and 14 novellas were written by others. People may remember that Roger Moore played the Saint in a TV show that ran from 1962 to 1969. Roger Moore was not actually the first choice. The role was originally offered to Patrick McGoohan, who starred in Danger Man, which was in the U.S. called Secret Agent Man, and later The Prisoner. I think Moore's portrayal of the smooth and debonair Simon Templar likely paved the way for him to get the James Bond role. There have been a ton of Saint movies over the years since 1938. The most recent theatrical release was in 1997 when the character was played by Val Kilmer. Do you remember it?
Yeah, I do remember it now.
Not good.
Yeah.
Not good.
Oh, Val Kilmer.
Yeah. And there was an adaptation novel of it, too, that Charteris had nothing to do with. And he's 14 theatrical movies and 9 made-for-TV movies from the Saint. The books have been reprinted countless times with packaging to reflect the times. The covers during the 1980s printing look a lot like Mac Bolan covers, probably hired some of the same artists. The ones during the Roger Moore episode series had TV tie-in covers, regardless of whether the stories were adapted for the TV show or not. It's not always clear if a particular Saint book is a full novel or a compilation of stories or novellas, so you want to check that out if you have a preference. The books are still in print. They're on Kindle. The audiobooks on Audible, free with Kindle Unlimited, including for some of them you can hear free audiobooks. I spoke to James Reasoner, a famous author and kind of academic in the field of pulp fiction. His favorite is called The Saint in Miami, and I intend to read that one. Many of the recent editions of The Saint have introductions by Leslie Charteris, and they're actually really insightful. In some, Charteris admits that the story wasn't all that good, but he thought it still had merits for this reason or that reason. He just seems like a really interesting guy. In fact, there's a new biography of Leslie Charteris by an author and historian named Ian Dickerson called A Saint I Ain't that looks pretty interesting. And there's a podcast called Spybrary that did a feature with the biographer on episode 94. The question which you are wondering, Eric, are these any good? And I'm not an expert. I've only read one book, which consisted on 3 very early novellas that I'll review later in the podcast. But here's my take. Charteris is a very good writer. Okay, this guy can write. Way better writing than the American pulps of the same era, right? Charteris could write really very compelling prose and not really cartoonish like I think Doc Savage sometimes descended into. The books are funny. The Saint's a very funny character. But I think the shorter works of the Saint probably play to Charteris' strengths. I think the perfect way to dip into the Saint is a 2-volume trade paperback compilation of short stories called The Best of the Saint, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 1 is an introduction by Ken Follett. Volume 2 has an introduction by Roger Moore. And that way you can see if the character and writing appeals to you. Most of the books and short stories have been reprinted many, many times, so you should have no problem finding loads of content if Simon Templar is up your alley. So that's what I got on the Saint.
Yeah, sounds great. I've got, 3 or 4 paperbacks. Now that you mentioned, I need to go and check and see if they're actual novels or if they're just collections.
Yeah, there's no way you would be able to tell until you turn to the table of contents.
All right, so my review is The Soldier of Fortune #2, Deadliest Game by Peter McCurtain. The Soldier of Fortune series was published between 1976 and 1985 with a brief hiatus in the early 80s. The series was created and edited by Peter McCurtain, who also authored 10 of the series' 18 installments. Paul Hofrechter wrote 1 installment, and Ralph Hayes authored 7. However, McCurtain's name is used on all the novels, if I'm not mistaken. Some of the books were published in the UK, where the series is called Jim Rainey, Death Dealer, but the series can be read in any order. And the premise is pretty simple. Anti-hero Jim Rainey is a professional soldier for hire whose loyalties always lie with the side who signs the checks. The Deadliest Game is the series' second novel and finds Rainey hunting terrorists in Argentina. So there's these political extremists called the Cordoba Committee that are terrorizing the Argentinian city of La Boca. While visiting a friend named Quinlan, Rainey finds himself in the terrorist crossfire at the War Ministry Annex. And this was really cool because the firefight is right at the beginning of the book. Rainey teams with Quinlan to kill the baddies. But because of Rainey's quick disposal of the terrorist, the country's president offers Rainey $5,000 if he can just go ahead and dispose of the whole terrorist cell. So, of course, Rainey accepts under the condition that he has complete autonomy in his methods. The catch, though, is that the president still wants Rainey to adhere to some type of military rules of engagement. So he assigns him this ridiculous ex-Nazi leader named Richter to assist. And immediately, Rainey and Richter hate each other. Rainey is more of this guerrilla fighter. He's got unorthodox methods. Richter is a flashy, let's throw medals on the chest, let's parade through the streets. He's your traditional soldier. So they don't really mesh at all. I think most of these books, Tom, and I think you've got more experience than me, but I think most of these books has Rainey taking on some sort of third world country mission that forces him to recruit mercenaries for the job, right?
Definitely, yeah.
So I don't know how fast I'll get tired or how quickly I'll get tired of that, but the first half of the book is recruitment and training. The second half is the hit and run exercises on the terrorist cell. And I've always loved McCurtain's writing style, and this one was really good. It showcases his talent. It's a first-person narrative, which I think
I like that. Now, you don't like first-person narratives. I love them. Where do you fall? Am I characterizing your position correctly?
No, I love first person.
Well, I thought you told me you didn't like them once. I thought you said you didn't like first-person narrations. Or maybe you were just observing that I love first-person narrations.
Yeah, maybe that was what it was, yeah.
And I was just assuming that you were denigrating me at the time.
Yeah, I really like first person. I think it adds a unique perspective to what really is a team-based combat book in this case. McCurtain makes the supporting characters sort of more dynamic than some of the other authors that deal with team-based books. There's a lot of dialogue, but the focus is really, honestly, the focus is Rainey and Richter's conflict and how much they hate each other and how they're maneuvering the crew to have allegiances with their priorities. Despite the average finale, I think this was really good. It's a 70s action-adventure, third-world mercenary book, and I think if you enjoy those types of books, you'll really like this one. I highly recommend it. It's got 2 different covers, by the way. I think one is simply Belmont, and I think the other is Tower. I always thought Belmont and Tower were the same thing, but I think they published separately in some cases. Again, this is Soldier of Fortune number 2, Deadliest Game by Peter McCurtain. And Tom, we've got some more time in the batter's box here.
Yeah, I still got to do my Saint review also for the Saint book, but the Soldier of Fortune books are really interesting because it's really 2 series almost. He wrote the first 9 books of the series, or actually he and Ralph Hayes did Hofrechter write 1 or 2 of those? Maybe. Wrote some of those in the 70s. Then the series between 1978 and 1984 took a hiatus, and then he ended up writing books 9 through 18 in the 1980s. So it's with totally different packaging, but the exact same character fighting in different wars. And so if you go and check out the Paperback Warrior blog, if you go to Soldier of Fortune number 17, Bloodbath by Peter McCurtain, in the afterword there, I give you the proper series order of the 18 books in the series, who the authors were, and what country they're fighting in. You got Rhodesia, Argentina, Lebanon, Indonesia, Panama, Kenya, etc. And so that might be a decent resource for you if you want to explore this series.
Yeah, definitely. All
right, so with your permission, I will launch into my review of The Saint number 6, Alias the Saint by Leslie Charteris. It's from 1931, although it's been reprinted many, many times in the copy I looked at that I think we're going to use for our photo when the review post is a very Mac Bolan-like cover. But it turns out that it's actually 3 novellas that originally appeared in the Thriller magazine in the UK in the late 1920s. Now, I'm going to give you capsule reviews of the 3, then tell you what I think of the book. First one's called The Story of a Dead Man, and it's the very first published novella in the entire Saint series. We get to meet Inspector Teal of Scotland Yard, whose professional goal is to lock up Templar. Teal finds Templar working in a benign London office job like a legitimate citizen. And so for a good bit of the book, Teal is trying to figure out why Templar is doing this. And there's many droll interactions between Templar and Teal, and a pretty funny reading. And again, Charteris' writings was really good, especially by American pulp standards. The pacing was a little off, though. There was way too much time setting up the characters before the mystery plot begins. Once it does, it's kind of a messy tale of a dead, swindling businessman. The story's more than a little confusing because there's just too many characters and subplots. But the characters are vividly drawn, and the prose, again, is superb. It took some focus and rereading to ensure that I didn't lose the plot thread. Templar is more of a Sherlock Holmes than a James Bond in this one, but he gets to kick ass a couple times. And this is one of those ones that I referred to where Charteris in his introduction says that it's not a really good book. Not a really good story, but it's definitely not his worst. I enjoyed it enough to keep me moving to the next novella, and if you're familiar with my reading style, that's nothing short of a miracle, because if a book's very quick to walk away from a book. The second story, and it's called The Impossible Crime. Templar has his eye on a guy running an import business who may or may not be a heroin smuggler for a fugitive Chicago mobster. The core of the story, though, is a locked room mystery in the tradition of John Dixon Carr, which has actually a really, really clever solution to it. It's one of those books where Scotland Yard Inspector Teal comes to Templar and wants his help in the investigation of a man shot to death in a locked room with no sign of a weapon. The victim happens to be the smuggler that Templar had been investigating on his own, leaving both a whodunit and a howdunit. There's some decent gunplay. There's a subplot involving a kidnapped girl and some genuinely funny moments from Templar. Once the locker room mystery is solved, it's actually solved twice. The payoff's really clever, like very, very clever. It felt a bit dated, but it was a far better story than the first one in the collection. The third story is called The National Debt. It's about a female chemist who's kidnapped and forced into indentured servitude by some crooks with an evil plan, and the saint goes undercover to investigate the matter and rescue the woman. The challenge is that the woman doesn't seem to want to be rescued. She's either hypnotized or drugged. The question remains about what the kidnappers want with the chemist and what they're doing. What do they need her to develop for them? It's just a straight-up mystery to be solved by Templar. It's the strongest of the three stories in the collection, but the conclusion was rather abrupt. The action veers a bit into Doc Savage territory, but it's never really cartoonish in the journey. So I think it'd be unfair to judge this wildly popular Saint series that lasted 70 years on the basis of this collection of the very first novellas. But I actually enjoyed the introduction to Simon Templar, even if the novellas failed to meet up to the promise of the cover art on the reprint. The Saint's just a great character, and I'm going to try more of the Saint, especially in the later years, once Charter has found his footing. Like I said earlier, I heard The Saint in Miami from 1940 is a high watermark in the series, so keep looking at paperbackwarrior.com. I'm going to be giving the series another try. That's it. That again is Alias the Saint by Leslie Charteris.
How long were those individual stories? Like 20, 25 pages?
No. More like 60 or 70 pages.
Okay.
Because, again, 3 novellas fill up a 210-page book or so. So about 70 pages, reasonable font. Again, they're available as ebooks and Audible books, too. So I spend a lot of time in the car. So especially with Kindle Unlimited, it costs me nothing, literally nothing. And the guy who reads it's just an excellent. He's got the British voice and all that. And so I did 1 or 2 of these on audio and one I read. But that may have been some of the confusion, right? It's when your mind wanders as you're driving down the highway, listening to an audiobook. If you miss something, you're like, oh, who's that character? And it's just not as easy to flip back a page and look.
Yeah, I really struggle with audiobooks.
I like nonfiction audiobooks. My wife is a huge nonfiction audiobook person, but like I said, I spend so much time in the car, and the production schedule you have me under is so oppressive that I need to turn to audiobooks. You're a slave driver.
I can listen to audiobooks if I've read the book already. Then I think it's fun.
Yeah.
But I can't concentrate on new material.
Yeah, we'll be talking about John D. MacDonald in a future episode. I just did an audiobook for him of one of his Travis McGee books, and it was real good.
Hey, what are you reading right now?
Oh, man, I wish I could remember. No, I'm starting a book called Ladyfingers by Shepard Rifkin. Have you heard of it?
No.
Okay, so Shepard Rifkin, he was a big Western author, wrote a lot of Westerns, wrote one Slocum, adult Western, which was absolutely terrible. But I think he has been rediscovered because one of his books called The Murderer Vine was reprinted by Hard Case Crime. And that was his second novel. Ladyfingers is his first novel, and The Murderer Vine, as I recall, took place in like the civil rights movement of the 60s. But it was a straight up, hard-boiled mystery. Ladyfingers is a police procedural starring a Hispanic police detective, an NYPD detective named Pablo Sanchez, and I'm a little unclear because I'm literally in chapter 1 right now. But someone is cutting off women's fingers and sending it to the police chief. So Pablo Sanchez, Ladyfingers is the name of the book. So Detective Pablo Sanchez, and I have no idea how much they're leaning into his Hispanic heritage, or if it just happens to be a Hispanic NYPD detective. He seems very American. He's the first-person narrative, Americanized. It's a first-person narrator. But he's got to solve this crime of these kind of, whose finger is it? Why are they cutting it off? Why are you sending this to the police chief? Stuff like that. So it seems pretty cool. It's got a wicked cover, and it's interesting to me that there's a mystery author who's probably a white Jewish guy based on the name, who seems very interested in the American minority experience to such an extent that his first 2 novels really dwell on that as a backdrop to his mystery stories.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that sounds good.
What are you reading now at the moment?
So I've been on a frontier kind of pace.
I've been editing your work lately, so I can tell.
Yeah, so I did the very first Sackett's book, which is called Sackett's Land. It's not the first Sackett's book. In the story, it's chronologically, I guess it's the first story. It's set in the 1599 to 1620 era. So it's Sackett's Land, which introduces Barnabas Sackett, and then I just finished up the second book, To the Far Blue Mountains, which tells Barnabas' tale in the New World, which is America, and then also his sons Kenring and Yancey. It concentrates a little bit on them, and then I just finished up the third novel today, which is called The Warrior's Path, and it's set on just Kenring mostly, and he's journeying back to Jamaica to hunt human trafficking, basically.
Oh, cool.
It's these books surprisingly aren't westerns. They're swashbuckling adventure stories.
It's kind of like he's created a universe of the Sackett family that he's drawing from different generations, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And these encompass adventures in England, Ireland, a lot of stuff on ships. So it's got a pirating or buccaneer type of feel to it. It's got a lot of swashbuckling, and then it's got a lot of early frontier stuff where they are learning about the Native Americans, the Catawba Indians. Most of the books are set in the East Coast, so they're in the Virginia, North Carolina area. And I'm getting ready to start the fourth book, which is called Jubal Sackett. Jubal is another one of Barnabas' sons, but Jubal, he just doesn't want to be around civilization, so he goes completely west. And it's funny because they don't really know what's beyond the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, North Carolina. So they keep saying, well, we want to get further west, but they really don't know what's out there. They have no idea that the Colorado River's there, the Mississippi River's there, and that the Rocky Mountains are out there. So they want to go further west. Jubal does. So the fourth book is pretty large. I think it's like 400 pages. It's all about Jubal. But the sad thing is that Louis L'Amour, he wanted to do more of the Sackett's history in the early times, before the 1800s. So he died, I think, in 88.
Yeah.
And Jubal Sackett was written in 1985. But in the notes of that book, it says that he had plans to write the Sacketts in the Revolutionary War, which I thought would be really good.
Yeah.
And then the Sacketts in the Civil War. And I'm going to do a feature. Actually, I shouldn't be talking about it now, but I'm going to do a feature on the Sacketts probably coming up in the next couple episodes.
Good.
But yeah, and L'Amour also had another family called the Chantrys, and they kind of cross paths with the Sacketts.
He's like Stan Lee.
Yeah, he's got all these little universes that he's created. Yeah,
that's neat.
Yeah.
You ever read Last of the Breed by him?
I love that book, and I read it in high school.
Good. I did too.
Yeah. I think I'm going to read it again, I think.
Yeah, I read it when it was a new book in 1985 or it had to be 1986. I had a driver's license. And
I remember getting it as hardback at the library.
Yeah, it was so good. And it's funny because I took my family to the Ronald Reagan Ranch Museum in Santa Barbara, California. And they basically transported Ronald Reagan's personal library from his ranch to this museum, and Louis L'Amour's Last of a Breed was right there as one of his favorite books. Yeah, it was kind of neat to see the Gipper and I were reading the same stuff at the same time.
Yeah, that was one of his favorite authors.
Yeah, well, clearly.
Yeah.
Cowboys. All right, so that probably wraps up this episode, or comes darn close to it. And so we want to thank you for joining us for another episode. We got some cool stuff coming up next week, so please stay tuned and check us out at paperbackwarrior.com for daily reviews. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye, guys.